4:47 a.m. Sardis Lake Access Road, southeastern Oklahoma. A 6-vehicle convoy rolled to a stop 300 yards from a weathered bait shop. No lights. No sirens. 42 federal agents and deputies moved into position. Boots crunched softly on gravel, then mud-soft earth beneath the tree line. Tactical vests. Sidearms. Long rifles slung across backs. Radio earpieces glowing faint green in the pre-dawn dark. Inside the shop, behind a wall of bait tanks and a false partition built from salvaged plywood, sat 41 rifles and 26 handguns that had crossed state lines 11 weeks earlier. The fugitive they came for had been living in a stockroom stacked with shad buckets since late April. Texas had been looking for him since May of 2025. Oklahoma game wardens had driven past the shop 217 times without knowing he was there. The breach took 9 seconds. One weekend, fishermen noticed warm water in a minnow tank and unraveled a 14-month manhunt. July 19th, 2026. 5:41 a.m. The front door of the bait shop splintered inward under a hydraulic ram. The sound cracked across the lake like a rifle shot. Agents flooded the sales floor. Overhead fluorescents flickered on, casting harsh white light across linoleum worn to the underlayment in traffic paths. Live bait tanks bubbled along the left wall. A chest freezer hummed in the corner. Hand-lettered price signs hung above stacked tackle boxes. Crappy jigs. Spinner rigs. Frozen shad in clear bags. 2 agents swept left. 3 swept right. A 5th covered the rear exit. Dust hung in the air from the splintered doorframe. The smell of live bait and mildew. Somewhere in the back, a radio played low. Classic country. Merle Haggard. The stockroom door stood at the back of the shop, behind a counter cluttered with receipts, and a cash register that hadn't been emptied in 3 days. 2 deputies put shoulders to the frame. The door gave on the second hit. Inside, a cot, a propane heater, a duffel bag, and a man in a fishing jacket pulling boots onto bare feet. Warren Aldis, age 34. Wanted in Texas on aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, unlawful possession of firearms by a felon, and 2 counts of evading arrest. The warrant had been active for 423 days. He didn't run, didn't fight, just raised both hands and sat back down on the cot. His face was calm, almost relieved. "Took you long enough," he said. One deputy crossed the room in 3 strides, pulled Aldis's hands behind his back, and cuffed him. Another swept the duffel. Clothes. A box of granola bars. A paperback Western with the cover torn off. No weapons. Aldis kept his eyes on the floor. His breathing was steady. He'd known this moment was coming. Maybe he'd been waiting for it. But the real find wasn't Aldis. It was what a K9 handler discovered 6 minutes later when his dog alerted on the bait tank wall. The wall looked solid. Tongue and groove pine boards painted the same dull green as the rest of the shop's interior. But when a deputy marshal tapped knuckles along the surface, the sound changed. Hollow. The dog kept barking. Sharp, insistent. The handler gave the alert signal. An agent found the seam. The partition wasn't anchored. It lifted away in 2 sections, each piece lighter than it looked. Behind it, a rack built from 2x4s and plumbing pipe. 41 rifles stood upright in homemade slots, AR-15 pattern rifles, bolt-action hunting rifles, 2 Remington 700s, 1 Ruger Precision in 6.5 Creedmoor. 26 handguns lay on a shelf below. Glock 17s, Sig Sauer P329s, a stainless Smith & Wesson revolver still in a factory case with the price tag from a Dallas gun shop dated February 12th. Every firearm had been reported stolen or purchased under false pretenses in the Dallas-Fort Worth corridor between January and April of 2026. Total street value, approximately $273,000. 3 men were arrested that morning. Aldis, the shop owner, a 56-year-old man named Eugene Trask, who'd bought the property in cash 18 months earlier, and Trask's nephew, a 29-year-old named Kyle Prather, who'd been living in a camper behind the shop since March. The Lone Star Fugitive Task Force had been hunting Aldis across 3 states for over a year. They'd raided a trailer park in Texarkana, kicked doors in Shreveport, chased tips through Little Rock and Tulsa. Every lead had gone cold. Then a fisherman buying minnows mentioned warm water to a game warden, and the whole case cracked open in 72 hours. Paperwork didn't break this case. Database hits didn't. Wiretaps didn't. An informant looking for a deal didn't. What broke it? A recreational angler who noticed something off and mentioned it in casual conversation 2 days later. That kind of break doesn't come from technology. It comes from luck and one person paying attention. May 7th, 2025. Collin County, Texas. A dispute over money owed from a firearms transaction turned into a parking lot confrontation outside a gun show in McKinney. Aldis and another man, whose name appears in court records only as J.M., had agreed to a private sale, 6 handguns for $4,000. The buyer claimed the guns were misrepresented. Aldis claimed the buyer was trying to renegotiate after the deal closed. The argument started inside the venue, voices rising near a display of AR uppers and Magpul accessories. Security asked both men to leave. They walked out separately. JM went to his truck. Aldis followed. What happened next was captured on a cell phone video recorded by a bystander 50 yards away. The video is grainy, shaky, but the audio is clear. Shouting. JM demanding his money back. Aldis telling him the deal was done. Then JM saying something about calling the cops. That's when Aldis reached behind his back. Witnesses reported seeing Aldis pull a Glock 9mm from his waistband and fire 3 rounds into the asphalt at the buyer's feet. The shots came fast. Pop, pop, pop. JM dove behind his truck. Bystanders scattered. One woman dropped to the pavement and covered her head. A man pulling a rifle case from his trunk froze mid-motion, then sprinted for the building entrance. No one was hit, but the rounds punched holes in the asphalt 6 inches from JM's boots, close enough that he felt the spray of debris against his jeans. Aldis ran. The buyer called McKinney police. An arrest warrant was issued the same day. Aldis was gone. His truck was found 3 hours later in a Walmart parking lot in Plano. Keys on the driver's seat. Registration removed. Security footage showed him getting into a silver Honda Accord, driven by an unidentified woman. The car's plates were reported stolen 2 days later in Garland. For the next 6 months, Aldis moved through East Texas and into Louisiana. small motels, temporary work under fake names. He stayed off phones, avoided cameras, paid cash. In November of 2025, a Texarkana motel clerk recognized him from a Texas Department of Public Safety wanted poster and called local police. By the time officers arrived, Aldis had cleared out. A search of the room turned up nothing but fast food wrappers and a prepaid phone with no SIM card. Then the trail went completely cold. The task force hit a wall. For 3 months, they had nothing. No sightings. No financial activity. No contacts with known associates. It was as if Aldis had evaporated. Deputy Marshal Rebecca Santos ran every database query she could think of. Traffic citations, emergency room visits, arrest reports in adjacent jurisdictions. She cross-referenced aliases, checked pawn shop transactions, monitored social media accounts tied to Aldis's family. Nothing. In late November, the task force executed a raid on a suspected safe house in Shreveport. The tip came from a confidential informant who claimed Aldis had been seen entering a duplex on Lakeshore Drive 3 days earlier. The informant was considered reliable. He'd provided actionable intelligence twice before. The raid happened at dawn. 14 agents. Full tactical gear. They hit both units simultaneously. Found a man sleeping on a couch in the East unit who matched Aldis's general description. Same height. Same build. Same age range. But when they rolled him over and checked his ID, it wasn't Aldis. It was his cousin. A man named Derek Aldis, who had no outstanding warrants and no involvement in the gun show incident. He'd been staying in Shreveport doing HVAC work. Had pay stubs. A rental agreement. Witnesses who confirmed his alibi. The agents cleared the duplex. Came up empty. Santos stood in the driveway afterward, watching the sun come up over a neighborhood that had nothing to do with her case, and felt the weight of 14 months pressing down. Every raid that came up empty meant more resources burned. More justification required. More pressure from supervisors asking when they were going to close this thing. The informant's tip had been good. Derek Aldis had been there. But Warren Aldis hadn't. And the task force was back to zero. That's the part that doesn't make it into the press releases. The dead ends. The false positives. The raids that turn up nothing but embarrassed apologies and property damage reports. Fugitive work is mostly failure. You chase 100 tips and 97 are wrong. The skill is in recognizing the 3 that aren't. In January of 2026, the task force learned through a confidential source that Aldis had been moving firearms out of the Dallas area for a loose network of buyers in Oklahoma and Arkansas. Small batches. Stolen weapons and straw purchases. The operation was opportunistic, not sophisticated. But Aldis had connections. One of them was Eugene Trask. Trask owned the bait shop on a county road 2 miles west of Sardis Lake. The property sat on 11 acres. No close neighbors. Heavy tree cover. A gravel driveway that ran 400 feet from the main road to the shop. Trask had bought it in February of 2025 with cash, no mortgage. Paid $173,000. The business was seasonal. Bass fishermen in spring. Crappie anglers in fall. Summers were slow. Winters nearly dead. What made the shop useful wasn't the fish. It was the isolation and the fact that a steady trickle of strangers pulling up at odd hours looked completely normal. A tackle shop near a lake. People come and go. They carry bags and coolers. They load trucks. They leave. Nobody thinks twice. Aldous arrived in late April. He drove a Chevy Silverado registered to a woman in Wichita Falls, who later told investigators she'd sold the truck for cash to a man matching Aldis's description. She'd posted it on Craigslist. The man showed up with $6,200 in 20s and 50s. Didn't haggle. Didn't ask for a receipt. Signed the title with a name she couldn't remember and drove off. She never reported the sale to the DMV. Trask cleared the stockroom. Set up a cot. Brought in a space heater and a hot plate. Aldous paid $500 a week. No questions. No records. He stayed inside during daylight. Read paperbacks. Listened to the radio. Ate canned soup heated on the hot plate. At night, he helped Trask and Prather move product. The guns came north in sealed feed sacks and plastic storage bins mixed in with legitimate deliveries. Aldous would sort and store them behind the partition. Every 2 weeks, buyers would arrive after hours. Cash transactions. No serial number checks. Firearms walked out the door in tackle bags and cooler chests. Sometimes a buyer would come in, purchase $20 worth of bait, and walk out with a Glock 19, hidden in a crappie bucket under a layer of ice and minnows. The system worked for 11 weeks. Then it fell apart because of a detail so small that nobody thought it mattered. July 15th, 2026. 6:18 a.m. A weekend angler named Thomas Greer pulled into the gravel lot outside the bait shop. Greer was 61. Retired postal carrier. Fished Sardis Lake every Saturday morning during crappie season. He bought his minnows from Trask because the shop opened earlier than the marina, and because Trask's bait always seemed livelier. Greer walked inside. The bell above the door chimed. Trask wasn't at the counter. Greer waited. He leaned against the bait tank wall while his eyes adjusted to the dim interior. The tanks bubbled. The aerator pumps hummed. He dipped a hand into the water to check temperature. An old habit from years of fishing. Cold water means healthy bait. Cold water means healthy bait. Warm water means die-off. The water was warm. Not hot, but noticeably warmer than it should have been. Live bait tanks run cool to keep the minnows healthy. This water felt closer to room temperature. Maybe 68, 70 degrees. Greer pulled his hand back. He heard something else. A low mechanical hum behind the wall. Like a generator idling. Or a space heater running. Trask came out from the stockroom. Greer bought 24 minnows. Paid cash. Didn't mention the water. He figured Trask's chiller was broken, and the old man would fix it when he had time. Equipment fails. Especially in rural Oklahoma, where replacement parts take a week to arrive, and service calls cost more than the gear is worth. Greer loaded his minnows into a bait bucket, walked back to his truck, and drove to the lake. He fished until noon. Caught 4 crappie and a small bass. Threw the bass back. Took the crappie home and cleaned them on a board in his driveway. That night, he fried them with hush puppies and didn't think about the bait shop again. 2 days later, Greer ran into a game warden at the boat ramp. The warden's name was Justin Lane. 32 years old. lean and sunburned with a ball cap pulled low against the glare. Lane worked the Sardis Lake district 6 days a week, checked licenses, monitored catch limits, wrote citations for unlicensed boats and over-limit stringers. Casual conversation. The warden asked how fishing had been. Greer mentioned the bait shop. Said he'd noticed the tank water running warm and thought maybe Trask's equipment was failing. Lane nodded. Made a mental note. Didn't think much of it. But the comment stuck. Not because it was urgent. Just because it was unusual. Trask ran a tight operation. If his chiller was broken, he'd have mentioned it. Put up a sign. Something. Lane had been briefed 3 months earlier by a deputy U.S. Marshal about possible fugitive activity in Latimer and Pushmataha counties. The briefing was generic. No names. Just a request to report anything unusual involving transient individuals or irregular commercial activity near the lake. Lane had filed it away, added it to the long list of things to watch for. Poachers, illegal netting, unregistered guides, and now, maybe, fugitives. Lane called the Marshals office that afternoon from his truck, parked outside a convenience store in Clayton. He wasn't sure it mattered. But the briefing had said report anything unusual. Warm bait tank water qualified. The deputy marshal who took Lane's call was Rebecca Santos, 14-year veteran, originally from Laredo, fluent in Spanish, a college degree in criminal justice, and a decade of fugitive work that had taken her from the southern border to the backwoods of Oklahoma. Santos had been running license plate readers on every access road around Sardis Lake for 8 weeks as part of the wider Aldis manhunt. She'd logged over 4,000 vehicle registrations. None had pinged as connected to Aldis or known associates. But Santos had noticed Trask's bait shop. Not because of anything specific, just because it was isolated and open at irregular hours. She'd driven past it twice, made a note in her case file, moved on. When Lane mentioned warm water and a generator noise, Santos pulled the file. She ran Trask's name through federal databases. No warrants, no criminal history. Clean. But the property purchase in cash stood out. And the shop's location fit the profile of a potential stash house or waypoint. Santos brought it to her supervisor, a supervisory deputy marshal named Carl Hendricks, 51 years old, gray at the temples, a scar across his left forearm from a fugitive who'd swung a machete during an arrest in Tulsa 8 years earlier. Hendricks had been running fugitive operations in eastern Oklahoma since 2014. He'd seen every variation of hideout. Trailers, storage units, abandoned farmhouses, seasonal businesses that doubled as fronts. Hendricks listened, asked 3 questions. How long had the shop been there? Who owned it? What kind of traffic did it see? Santos answered each one. Then Hendricks made the call, put eyes on the shop. Discreetly. No overt presence. Just watch who comes and goes. Surveillance started on July 16th at 3:30 p.m. 2 unmarked vehicles parked on logging roads with sight lines to the shop's driveway. One team positioned northwest in a clearing behind a stand of pine. The other team southeast on an overgrown fire access road. Both had binoculars, telephoto cameras, notepads, thermoses of coffee, Agents rotated shifts every 6 hours. They logged every vehicle, photographed every face, ran every plate. For the first day and a half, they saw nothing unusual. Customers came and went. An old Ford pickup at 7:30 a.m. A Dodge Ram at 9:15. A Subaru Outback with a canoe strapped to the roof at 11:40. Trucks delivering live bait. A propane service van. Weekend anglers buying minnows before dawn. All of it normal. All of it expected. Then, at 11:34 p.m. on July 18th, a second man appeared. Not Trask. Not a customer. A younger man, mid to late 20s, carrying sealed feed sacks from a pickup truck into the shop. He made 4 trips, carried the sacks in, never came out with them. The sacks looked heavy. He bent at the knees to lift each one, grunted with effort, disappeared into the shop, came back empty-handed, repeated. Agents photographed him under infrared. The images were grainy but clear enough. Short hair, goatee, flannel shirt, jeans, work boots. Facial recognition software identified him as Kyle Prather, Trask's nephew. No criminal record, no outstanding warrants. But the activity pattern was wrong. Why bring feed sacks into a bait shop at midnight? And why not take them back out? Santos requested a thermal imaging pass. A small drone equipped with FLIR flew over the property at 2:41 a.m. on July 19th. The shop's interior showed 3 heat signatures, one behind the counter, one in the stockroom, one near the bait tanks. 3 people inside a closed business in the middle of the night. The task force escalated. They pulled Trask's financial records. Bank statements showed cash deposits consistent with retail bait sales but also irregular large deposits. $7,800 in March, $6,200 in May, $9,100 in June. No explanation in the records. No corresponding invoices. No business receipts that matched the amounts. Agents also pulled surveillance footage from a gas station 4 miles east of the shop. Footage from June showed a man matching Aldis's description pumping gas into a Chevy Silverado. The man wore a baseball cap and kept his face down, but a still frame caught his left wrist as he reached for the fuel nozzle. A tattoo. Partial. Just visible under a fishing glove. Santos compared it to known photos of Aldis from the Texas warrant file. The ink matched. A compass rose with coordinates underneath. Aldis had gotten it in Dallas in 2022. The coordinates were for a location in West Texas where he'd grown up. His grandfather's ranch. Long since sold. That image moved the case file from possible to confirmed. The task force had been chasing Aldis for 14 months. Every raid had come up empty. Every tip had led nowhere. The manhunt had cost tens of thousands of dollars in overtime, surveillance equipment, and interagency coordination. Agents had been working the case in shifts, following leads across 3 states, coordinating with local law enforcement from Texas to Arkansas. And now they had him. In a bait shop, 2 miles from a lake, living in a stockroom behind minnow tanks. The question was timing. Hit the shop immediately and risk spooking him if he had a lookout they hadn't spotted. Wait too long and risk him moving again. The task force had one chance. If Aldis ran, they might not find him for another year. or longer. Some fugitives disappear for decades, live under new names, die without ever being caught. The task force convened at 4 p.m. on July 18th. 17 agents, representatives from the U.S. Marshals Service, the Eastern District of Oklahoma, the Oklahoma Highway Patrol, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. They met in a conference room at the Pushmataha County Sheriff's Office. A whiteboard on the wall, satellite images of the bait shop printed and spread across a table, floor plans sketched from memory by an agent who'd bought bait there 2 weeks earlier while undercover. The consensus: hit the shop at first light, minimize civilian exposure, maximize tactical surprise, no air support, no sirens, no advance warning, just boots on the ground and a ram through the door. A federal judge signed the search and arrest warrants at 9:51 p.m. The warrants authorized entry to the shop, the residence camper, and all outbuildings. They named Aldis, Trask, and Prather. They specified firearms, ammunition, financial records, and electronic devices. The judge asked one question: "Are you certain he's there?" Santos showed him the thermal image, the tattoo still frame. The judge signed. Only 3 people in the task force knew the target location before the final briefing. The warrants stayed sealed until the arrests were logged. At 3:42 a.m. on July 19th, 6 vehicles carrying 42 agents rolled out from a staging area near Clayton. The convoy moved without lights until they reached the turnoff to the bait shop. Radios were set to encrypted tactical channels. Agents checked their gear: vests, sidearms, flex cuffs, flashlights, breaching tools. A medic rode in the 4th vehicle with a trauma kit and an AED. At 4:39 a.m., they stopped 300 yards short. Agents moved on foot through trees and tall grass, still wet with dew. The air smelled like mud and pine. Crickets went silent as the line advanced. Boots squelched in soft earth. Someone's radio chirped once and was immediately silenced. The shop sat dark and silent. One light burned in the camper behind it. A yellow bug light over the door. No dogs. No exterior cameras. No fence. No movement. Agents stacked at the front door. Breaching team. Arrest team. Evidence recovery team. A K9 handler positioned near the left corner of the building, with a German shepherd trained in narcotics and weapons detection. The dog sat calm and alert, ears forward, watching the door. Radio silence. Hand signals only. The team leader raised a closed fist, held it, waited, then dropped it. At 4:47 a.m., the ram swung. The door exploded inward. Splinters and dust. Agents poured through the gap shouting commands. Federal agents. Search warrant. Get on the ground. Hands where we can see them. The fluorescence buzzed to life. The shop interior materialized in harsh white light. Empty. No one at the counter. No one in the aisles. Just the bubble of bait tanks and the hum of the freezer, and Merle Haggard singing low from a radio in the back. The raid itself was over in under 11 minutes. Aldis was cuffed and seated on the shop floor by 4:53 a.m. He didn't resist. Didn't speak, except to confirm his name. Trask was pulled from the camper at 4:58, barefoot and disoriented, wearing boxer shorts and a t-shirt with a base fishing logo. Prather surrendered without incident at 5:01 after agents found him asleep in the back of his truck under a tarp. By 5:15, agents had secured the premises and begun evidence collection. Photographs of the layout, measurements, evidence tags. A forensic team dusted for prints. Another team bagged electronics. The K9 alerted on the bait tank wall at 5:47. The partition came down at 5:51. And there it was. 67 firearms that shouldn't exist. Shouldn't be there. Shouldn't have made it across state lines without a single background check or federal form. The firearms were photographed in place, cataloged, and removed by 6:32. Each one tagged. Each serial number recorded. Agents also recovered $16,400 in cash from a floor safe in the camper. A laptop. 3 prepaid phones. Handwritten ledgers showing dates, quantities, and dollar amounts that appeared to track firearms transactions going back to February. And a Texas driver's license in Aldis's real name hidden inside a tackle box under the counter. He'd kept it. A memento of who he used to be. The operation was textbook. No shots fired. No injuries. No collateral damage. But standing in that stockroom at dawn, looking at 67 firearms that had been stolen, trafficked and sold without a single background check, Santos couldn't shake one thought. If Thomas Greer hadn't mentioned warm water to a game warden, Aldis might still be there. At 7:32 a.m., agents transported Aldis to the Pushmataha County Jail for processing. He sat in the back of an unmarked Suburban, hands cuffed behind him, staring out the window at the Oklahoma landscape rolling past. Pine trees. Red dirt. A hawk circling over a field. Santos rode in the front passenger seat. She turned once to look at him. "You knew we were coming," she said. Aldis didn't answer right away. Then he nodded. "Once. For about a week," he said. "Felt it. Why didn't you run?" He shrugged. Tired of running. That was all he said. The rest of the drive passed in silence. At the jail, Aldis was fingerprinted, photographed, and placed in a holding cell. He waived his right to an attorney during initial questioning. Sat across from Santos in an interview room with cinder block walls painted institutional beige. A table bolted to the floor. 2 chairs. A camera in the corner, recording everything. Santos asked him about the guns. Where they came from. Who supplied them. How the network operated. Aldis answered some questions. Dodged others. He confirmed he'd been living at the shop since late April. Confirmed Trask and Prather were involved. But when Santos asked about suppliers and buyers, Aldis went quiet. "I'm not giving you names," he said. "Why not?" "Because I'm not." Santos leaned back. Studied him. Aldis looked exhausted. Not just from the arrest. From everything. 14 months on the run. Living out of duffel bags. Sleeping in stockrooms. Always looking over his shoulder. Always waiting for the door to kick in. "You could help yourself here," Santos said. "Cooperation counts. You know that." Aldis shook his head. "I'm done cooperating. I'm done with all of it. Charge me. Sentence me. I'll do the time." And that was it. The interview ended. Aldis was returned to his cell. Santos walked out into the Oklahoma morning and stood in the parking lot for a long time, watching the sun climb over the pines. The reality that stings: the system didn't catch Aldis. A fisherman did. The task force had been running data, checking plates, following leads for 14 months. They'd deployed resources across 3 states. And what broke the case wasn't an algorithm or a database. It wasn't advanced surveillance or forensic analysis. It was a 61-year-old man who thought something felt off and mentioned it in conversation 2 days later. That's not a criticism of law enforcement. It's just the reality. Most fugitive captures don't come from high-tech surveillance. They come from small, human moments. A neighbor who notices a car that doesn't belong. A clerk who remembers a face. An angler who feels warm water and thinks something's not right. We spend billions on technology. Plate readers. Facial recognition. Predictive analytics. Fusion centers that process terabytes of data every day. And those tools matter. They solve cases. They find people. But they still depend on someone, somewhere, noticing something wrong and picking up a phone. Would you have mentioned the warm water, or would you have assumed it was just broken equipment and moved on? The legal process moved quickly. Aldis was arraigned in the Eastern District of Oklahoma on July 21st. He waived extradition to Texas and was transferred to Collin County 2 days later. The original assault charge was amended to include federal firearms trafficking. Texas added charges related to the stolen firearms recovered in Oklahoma, multiple counts, each one carrying mandatory minimums. Eugene Trask was charged with being a felon in possession of firearms, conspiracy to traffic firearms across state lines, and operating an unlicensed firearms business. Records showed Trask had a felony conviction from 1998 for receiving stolen property. A VCR and 2 televisions taken from a storage unit in Durant. He'd completed probation. Stayed clean for over 2 decades. Ran the bait shop legitimately for years. Then met Aldis through a mutual acquaintance in Dallas and saw an opportunity. Easy money. Low risk. Or so he thought. Kyle Prather was charged with conspiracy and aiding and abetting. His public defender negotiated fast. Prosecutors offered a plea deal in exchange for full cooperation. Prather took it. He told investigators that Aldis had been using the shop as a hub since late April, and that firearms shipments came in every 7 to 10 days. Sometimes more. Prather named suppliers and buyers, drew maps, provided dates and dollar amounts. Gave them everything. Prather also revealed something agents hadn't known. Aldis had been planning to leave. He'd told Trask the week before the raid that he was moving on. Said Oklahoma was getting too warm. Too many game wardens. Too many boats on the lake. Too many chances for someone to notice. He'd already scouted a location in Missouri. A storage facility outside Joplin. Climate-controlled units. 24-hour access. No on-site manager. He was supposed to drive there on July 22nd. 2 boxes of rifles in the truck bed under a tarp and a load of fishing gear. If the raid had come 3 days later, Aldis would have been gone. The shop would have been empty. The guns moved. The trail cold again. Timing is everything. And in this case, timing came down to a fisherman, a game warden, and a deputy marshal who trusted a hunch about warm water. Among the 67 firearms recovered from the shop was a Sig Sauer P329 that had been stolen from a vehicle in Frisco, Texas, on March 14th. The owner was a 38-year-old software engineer named Michael Cordero. He'd parked outside a grocery store, went inside for 15 minutes, came back to find his passenger window smashed and the gun gone from the center console. Cordero reported it immediately, filed a police report, checked pawn shops, posted on local gun forums. Nothing. The gun vanished. 3 months later, ATF called to tell him they'd recovered it in Oklahoma. Cordero drove to the field office in Dallas to reclaim it. An agent walked him through the recovery process. Paperwork, verification, a background check even though it was his own gun. "Where'd you find it?" Cordero asked. The agent told him. A bait shop, a fugitive, a cache of stolen guns. Cordero listened. Then he asked the question everyone asks: who bought it? The agent didn't know. The ledgers recovered from the shop listed dates and prices, but not buyer names. Just initials. The SIG was listed as MP, sold June 9th for $800. No other information. Cordero got his gun back. But he couldn't shake the thought someone had been walking around with a stolen firearm that could be traced back to him. If that gun had been used in a crime, Cordero's name would have come up in the investigation. His life would have been pulled into something he had nothing to do with. All because he'd left a gun in his truck for 15 minutes. That's the hidden cost of gun trafficking. It's not just the theft. It's not just the illegal sale. It's the trail of liability that follows every stolen firearm. The original owner becomes a loose thread in every crime that weapon touches. 16 of the 67 firearms recovered had similar stories. Stolen from vehicles. Stolen from homes. One rifle had been taken during a burglary in Arlington, where the homeowner was out of town for a wedding. He came back to find his back door kicked in and 3 rifles gone from a bedroom closet. Another handgun had been reported stolen from a gym locker in Fort Worth. The owner had left it in a bag, went to shower, came back to find the locker pried open and the bag gone. Every one of those owners got a call from ATF. Every one of them had to relive the theft. And every one of them asked the same question: who bought it? Most of the time, there's no answer. August 10th, 2026. Aldis was in federal custody awaiting trial. His attorney filed a motion to suppress evidence from the search, arguing that the warrant was based on insufficient probable cause. The motion was denied. Trial is scheduled for November. Prosecutors are seeking a sentence in the range of 12 to 15 years. Trask pleaded guilty in early August and is awaiting sentencing. Guidelines suggest 46 to 57 months. His attorney argued for leniency based on Trask's age, his lack of prior violent offenses, and his cooperation during the investigation. The judge has not yet ruled. Prather received 18 months under his plea agreement. He'll serve it at a minimum security facility in Texas. He's expected to be released in early 2028. The 67 firearms recovered from the shop were entered into ATF's National Tracing Center database. 41 have been matched to reported thefts in Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. 15 were purchased legally by straw buyers who are now under investigation. Agents have identified 7 of them. Interviews are ongoing. Charges are pending. Those 11 guns will likely never be returned. They'll sit in an evidence locker until destroyed. Their origins are unknown. No theft reports. No purchase records. They exist in a legal gray space. Guns without history. The kind that come from estate sales, private transfers, decades-old transactions that were never documented. Investigators believe the Sardis Lake shop was one of at least 3 similar locations operating in Oklahoma and Arkansas during the same period. The other 2 have not been identified. The network that supplied the guns is still active. Buyers who purchased firearms from the shop are still out there. Some of those guns are still in circulation. What haunts me, how many other bait shops are out there? How many auto repair shops, storage units, seasonal businesses sitting just off a county road with no neighbors and no reason for anyone to look twice? The infrastructure that made this work wasn't complicated. It was banal. A legitimate business. Cash transactions. Irregular hours that nobody questioned because they fit the context. People expect a bait shop near a lake to open early. They expect trucks to come and go. They expect customers at odd hours. The cover was perfect because it wasn't really cover. It was just reality with a hidden layer underneath. The only thing that exposed it was one man noticing that the water felt wrong. Thomas Greer gave a statement to investigators after the raid. He told them he almost didn't mention the warm water. Said he figured it wasn't his business. Trask would fix it or he wouldn't. Either way, Greer would just buy his bait somewhere else if the minnows started dying. But the warden had asked how fishing was going, and Greer was making conversation, so he said it. 2 sentences. Offhand. No expectation that it would matter. It mattered. There are moments in every investigation where the whole thing pivots on something impossibly small. A broken taillight that leads to a traffic stop, that leads to a warrant check, that leads to an arrest. A mismatched invoice that triggers an audit that uncovers fraud. A water tank that should be cold but isn't. Those moments only matter if someone notices, and if that someone decides it's worth saying out loud. Greer didn't get a reward. Didn't ask for one. He went back to fishing. The last time Santos spoke to him, he said he was glad he could help, but mostly he just wanted his regular bait shop back. He liked Trask's minnows. They were livelier than what the marina sold. Now he has to drive an extra 20 minutes. The shop is closed now. The property is in federal forfeiture proceedings. The bait tanks have been drained. The partition that hid the guns has been dismantled and photographed for evidence. The hand-lettered price signs are still hanging on the walls, fading in the Oklahoma heat. Crappie jigs $3. Minnows $5 a dozen. The kind of prices that haven't changed in a decade. A for sale sign went up in late July. No takers yet. The property is tainted now. Everyone in Pushmataha County knows what happened there. No one wants to buy a bait shop that used to hide stolen guns. Even if you tore it down and built something new, the story would follow the land. 41 rifles, 26 handguns, 3 arrests, one 14-month manhunt that ended because a weekend angler bought minnows and noticed the water was warm. That's the case. But the network that fed it is still out there. The demand that drove it hasn't changed. Stolen firearms are still moving across state lines. Straw buyers are still making purchases. Buyers are still paying cash for guns they shouldn't have. And somewhere, another seasonal business is opening its doors before dawn, selling something legitimate to cover something that isn't. The question isn't whether it'll happen again. The question is whether the next Thomas Greer will say,